Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of The Conversation. This afternoon, we have with us Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh of CCG. Once again, our goal today is just to carry on a conversation with prominent Gambians in the fight to restore democracy back in the Gambia. We're going to take a quick music break and then allow Mr. Janneh to get ready, and we will be having a very interesting conversation with you. Dr. Janneh, hang on one quick second, and we will be right back. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back again. Once again, this is The Conversation. My name is Amadou. I am here with Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh of CCG. Dr. Janneh, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a true believer that we do have to get to know each other. What we're going to do this afternoon is to get to know who Dr. Janneh is, and I think in most cases, many of us just don't get to know each other very well. We will speak to him about current issues and also where he stands on certain issues of the current situation in our country. We will also take the time to speak with Dr. Janneh about the 2016 upcoming Gambian election. Dr. Janneh, we'll go ahead and get started without further delay. If you were to ask folks out there who Dr. Janneh is, I bet many would simply just say he's from Brufut, he's a member of the Gambian struggle. It might take many of us fighting together don't really get to know each other. Today we want you to take the time. Tell us who Dr. Janneh is, what part of the Gambia you're from, and what you do right now.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because the first thing I do in any interview is to point out that I'm from Gunjur and a proud citizen of Gunjur, and that's where I did my elementary school and then went on to do a high school in Banjul, but that's where I call home. I have, after doing high school at St. Augustine's High School, I worked briefly for the Rural Development Project, and I was based in Janneh, and then after that I worked for Radio Gambia as a news reporter, and it was during the time of Kukoi. Myself and Musa Silla, who also became a minister at some point, Minister of Trade, we covered the treason trials following the 1981 attempted coup or rebellion in the Gambia. And then in 1983, I came to the United States, so you could say I've been here since 1983, and I studied journalism for the undergraduate, and then I went to graduate school and did a master's and PhD in political science, and went back to the Gambia in 1993, worked briefly at the Foreign Affairs Ministry during the first regime, returned back to the U.S., continued teaching at the University of Tennessee, went back again. So in essence, I've been in and out of the country. I lived here since 83. and that's about it. But I know the other part of the of my activities will get to that.
Thank you so much. You said that you're from Gunjur, so that's in that part of the country. Brikama is the capital. Would you agree that Brikama is the capital of Gunjur?
Well, Brikama is the capital of the region, but Gunjur is the main town or main city in southern Combo, and Gunjurians would not agree to Brikama being a capital, but at least it is for the region, for the western coast region. But we have a lot of ties, family ties between folks in Brikama, Gunjur, Sukuta, Brufut, all of those areas. A lot of ties, very close ties, family ties, etc.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, just for the record, I know that these Gunjur people and the Brikama folks are always at it on social media, so I thought that I would just throw a quick jab at Dr.
Well,
Janneh
that's Sukuta. Sukuta are our main rivals. The Brikama folks we don't have problems with, except Brufut Banker tries to create problems for us, but the Sukutarians are the folks we go after more than anyone else.
Good. Thank you so much for that little information, Dr. Janneh. Now, Dr. Janneh, you talked about your schooling. Part of success has to do with a young man growing up in a country, going overseas, studying, and returning to help a government. You were, under the Jammeh regime, a minister. What is minister life like under this regime, and what does an average day look like for a Gambian minister?
Well, in most cases, in many countries, particularly democracies, there's a lot of interaction within the cabinet and also between the cabinet and the head of government or the head of state. But that's not the case in the Gambia because it's a dictatorship. It's largely a one-man show. It's not unusual, or at least it wasn't unusual, for decisions to be taken in ministries where the minister had no prior knowledge or had no idea as to how a policy was arrived at. I know that from first-hand experience. So occasionally when you have cabinet meetings, you would have the president there, and then there'd be some kind of a debate on issues. But it's largely Jammeh who decides and simply sends directives to the ministries to carry out. So it's and the only time in my case where I got to see him beyond the cabinet meetings is when you have like a diplomat coming to make a presentation. He would select 2 or 3 ministers to come and attend the event. So beyond that, it's just his inner circle, particularly those in the security that are very loyal to him, that he trusts, who deal directly with him. So it's and cabinet sessions could extend, and I believe Jammeh holds cabinet meetings simply to give the impression that others have input in the process, but in many cases you do not get into serious discussions on policy matters. And I remember one time we spent a lot of time drinking attire, meat, and tons of paper submitted by permanent secretaries, but the discussions were very peripheral indeed.
Are you telling us that these meetings sometimes are just time spent to drink attire and eat barbecue meat? And is this what you're telling us, that when Gambian ministers sometimes get together, this is what a parliament meeting looks like?
Well, not all the time, but there have been several cases in which there were no serious discussions on policy matters, even though the documents were there, submitted by permanent secretaries. They must have done a lot of work to submit them. That shows that Jammeh really gets folks to do the work, but at the end, he just decides, regardless of what type of information is put before him. And in those cases, you would be there waiting for him before he comes. It would take a while. And, of course, you get served your attire, meat, and so on. Doesn't mean that's what happens all the time, but there have been cases in which that took a chunk of our time. But the material is generally submitted, and people have ideas, but they don't mean anything as far as Jammeh is concerned. It's a one-man show. All of these things, the cabinet meetings, even cabinet secretaries, ministers, these are Jammeh makes those appointments, schedules the meetings only to make it appear as if we have a genuine process there. But he does not rely on the counsel of people in his cabinet or permanent secretaries. Jammeh relies on his own inner circle, and he ultimately decides. Sometimes, when he wakes up, he can make a U-turn and doesn't even have to give any explanation to the country.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's actually very concerning. You did mention that.
And it's good also to give examples so that people don't think now we're trying to get him out and making up stories. I know there was one case in which an ISP, Internet Service Provider, decided to set up some equipment, a VSAT, to be able to have its own Internet gateway without going through Gamtel. And, of course, licenses are required to do that type of thing since Gamtel still has a monopoly of the gateway, and except for embassies, all others are required to have licenses. And the government was not giving out those licenses. And for some reason, AfriCell and one of its key patrons was able to lobby the president very hard, and he insisted, no, we wouldn't give them any licenses until you do a study so we know how the licensing process goes and how much it should cost and stuff like that. But while I was doing that, he sent us a directive to say, issue a license to AfriCell so they can set up a VSAT regardless of this process, etc. So I had to go through and delay it a little bit. And at the end, those guys went ahead and set up their VSAT even before getting any license. So tells you what goes on. But as it happens, after they put up their VSAT, their competitors complained, went to the president, and then he sent the NIA to dismantle everything and arrested some of the AfriCell leaders and made sure they dismantled it, and told me again, sent another directive to say we should do everything to see that AfriCell takes down the VSAT. He did not approve it for anything, but he was just trying to see who was behind AfriCell's project. So it tells you how erratic this guy is, and it's very difficult to put any reasoning to the type of decision-making he has.
Wow. Thank you for that great example, because it shows the Gambian people what type of person we have as our leader. Now, you talked about his how he acts in office. You have met Yaya, and you obviously know a little bit more about him than the average person. How is he as a person? I mean, from your observations in dealing with him, and does he really understand the role that he is the head of a nation?
Well, I have a serious doubt. That's why I've been posting stuff saying perhaps Jammeh has serious mental problems, and we've not come to that realization yet. The guy, the way he makes decisions, the U-turns, he can recruit some guy from the APRC, make them appear so powerful, give them titles, and then when faced with criticism, or if they appear to be somewhat popular, he'll go undermine them, lock them up, and put somebody else, and sometimes family members, as we've seen with the IGP. So I think since the inception of his regime, Jammeh may have figured in his own mind that one way to stay in power in the Gambia would be to divide the people as much as possible, to be willing to sacrifice family members, to be willing to sacrifice some of his closest aides, because it's very difficult to understand how, for instance, Baba Job, who was considered one of the closest guys to Jammeh, could be dining with him and doing all that stuff, and the next minute he keeps him in jail for more than 8 years and refuses to release him, and the guy subsequently dies. Or to see how he himself made statements about Lang Tombong helping prop up his regime when it was threatened, giving him enormous powers and appointing him everywhere, and the next minute he is about to kill him. So it's very difficult to figure what type of person, but it would not be far-fetched to say Jammeh clearly has mental problems, because you can't be switching on and off like that, making U-turns when deciding, and at least that's my observation.
Now, you talked about that he does sacrifice, obviously, his close aides and friends. Tell us, in your take, how did Yahya become so powerful in the nation to the point where he single-handedly is oppressing on millions of people? How did that happen in your take? Just to understand how this came about.
Well, I think there are a few factors. When he staged the coup, when he came to power, and, we had one leader, one regime for 30 years, and a lot of people were tired of the PPP. And we must be honest with ourselves. Of course, the PPP is nothing like what we have now, the PPP regime, and it's not even a matter of trying to compare the two. But we must realize that at the time that Yahya staged the coup, the country was in a mess. We had a terrible infrastructure, and the schools were, it was very difficult for people, especially in the rural areas, to go to school. And some of these are not things I'm talking about from a distance. As I mentioned, I did work briefly for the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and during that brief period, one of my responsibilities was to write speeches and also briefs for those going to international events. One of them involved the World Conference on Human Rights in, I think, Geneva, and also the AU's anniversary in Cairo, Egypt. So I was very familiar. And, of course, I lived in Serekunda, going to school in Banjul, St. Augustine's. So I knew the types of problems that students went through during the PPP regime. So people were very tired of the regime, and they saw Jammeh as a savior, especially the promises he made. Of course, there are many who looked at the whole situation and said, no, this is the military again. We'll end up in a far worse situation. But the overwhelming majority saw a chance for genuine change. And that's why he was able to get support. He was able to get the benefit of the doubt. And a lot of folks worked in putting together a constitution that he ultimately undermined. But on top of that, he was able to divide the opposition. He was able to put out a scheme, develop a scheme to divide and weaken the opposition, at the same time instilling fear in the population. He must have realized very early that one way he could stay in power is to be ruthless. And that's not something Gambians are used to, people disappearing, people getting killed, etc. And that has created some kind of mystery around Jammeh. People, there are folks who genuinely think he has supernatural powers. Of course, we know better than that. And so the fear, being able to instill fear in the population, capitalizing on the problems of the previous regime, and being successful in dividing and weakening the opposition, I think these are factors that have kept Jammeh in power up to now. But we have seen a very rapid erosion of the element of fear in the country. People have been pushed to the wall, and I believe the fear element is eroding significantly, and the hope is that the opposition, the division, would also be a thing of the past.
Thank you so much for that in-depth answer, Dr. Janneh. Now, you obviously mentioned a lot of factors. Just recently, I was talking to a family member of mine, and we were talking about how Jammeh has turned the entire country his own possession, and where people are now actually even farming for him. And we've seen that people, he sends his family out to the international, to overseas for treatment. His daughter is here, in a private boarding school, paying $80,000 a year for her schooling. In your take, given all this information is out there, what do you think is still the missing piece for people to really understand that, listen, this guy is not good for our nation. We really have to put one-on-one together. Why are we farming for him? I've never farmed for my father, but if I were to find myself there, I've seen people that have never farmed. And the joke is that you see them at the farm and you feel sorry for them. What is missing for people to understand?
Well, in this case, you have both poverty and fear. Jammeh, as you mentioned, is involved in almost every sphere of economic activity in the country, from selling cement, sand mining, producing diapers. Even the Ashobi that APRC militants wear is produced by one of Jammeh's companies. And therefore, if he becomes the chief economic power in the country, and also has the power to fire civil servants or public servants at will, that's a lot of power. So he's been able to use that. And the fear has contributed to people, doing stuff that they would not ordinarily do, for fear that they would lose their job, somebody would report them. And on top of that, you have directors and permanent secretaries being required to take roles of people who do this slave work, that they call volunteerism. So it's very difficult. You don't want to be fired. You don't want to be targeted simply because you may lose your livelihood at a time when things are very difficult in the country. But I don't think many of those people going to his farm necessarily support him. But they've been put in a situation, or at least the whole country has been put in a situation where we stretch our arms for handouts from Jammeh. And in some cases, people disappearing on suspicion of being anti-Jammeh simply for not participating in such events, or at least even discouraging colleagues to not to participate. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation, but we have a responsibility to continue to put out information, to tell people these are things you don't have to do. The more you continue allowing yourselves to be enslaved, the more you allow yourself to be consumed by fear to the point where you are afraid to even mention Jammeh's name, the longer it would take for him to leave power, the longer our suffering will be. Our suffering would continue as long as people remain silent out of fear.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now, you talked about, obviously, we're talking about Jammeh's dictatorship. We all heard President Obama very recently say that, listen, if the Constitution allowed me to run for a third term, I can easily win a third-term election here, but the Constitution doesn't allow it. And he expressed that he couldn't wait to get out of this whole bubble that he's in to go enjoy private life with his family. Why do you think that when African leaders come into power, they turn dictators and they refuse to leave? In your take, why do you think that is like so consistent in the continent?
That's a disappointing observation about African leaders. You have only a handful who respected their constitutions and stepped down after 2 terms after electoral defeat. And perfect examples, of course, are in Senegal. And Nelson Mandela also coming and then announcing that after 1 term he was not going to run again. We all knew Nelson Mandela could have won the election as long as he was alive. But it's a very disappointing thing, and that means we have a long way to go. And for many of these leaders, if you rule as a dictator, as an authoritarian leader, you repress your people, then you are afraid of what would happen to you after you leave power. I mean, if you had served very well, you respected the laws of your country, then you won't have any fear as to what would come about, what would happen to you after stepping down. But imagine Jammeh, who's killed so many people, made a lot of people disappear. Even regardless of what is signed, let's assume there's some agreement that he would be given immunity if he decides to step down. He himself would not trust that document. He would know ultimately there will be some way to go after him for atrocities. You can't just kill people and then sign some document. So it's a very difficult. If you rule as a Democrat, you respect the laws of your country and step down, you're likely to play a prominent role as an eminent person, as a peacemaker, as a role model, in the continent, and have a better life after the presidency. But these guys repress their own people and then are afraid to leave, and also steal so much, embezzle funds, engage in so much corruption that they do not want to give up power for any reason.
Thank you.
We hope that trend changes. We hope new leaders emulate what we are seeing in Senegal, what we are seeing in just a handful of African countries, but the overwhelming majority send a very bad signal, and that's why it's difficult to complain when Westerners and other observers look at our continent and make deriding remarks, because we have so-called leaders who have no other interest than to stay in power, even at the expense of their own nations. You're
very right when you really said that when they're in office, they don't do right, they kill people, corruption, so they fear leaving that office, which results into turning into dictators. But let me ask you, as a young man who obviously has been to a lot of these internationals on these international stages, and obviously understand international politics a little bit more, what do you think Africans generally needs to do to stop dictatorship in the nation? Because it is definitely killing us, and we don't see it ending soon. What does the young African have to do to really stop this dictatorship thing going on and get back to normal democracy and gradual development, so that Africa can also get out of the poverty and that we're in?
Well, it's going to be a very difficult and complex process, as we saw in Zambia, for instance, where trade union leader considered as a new type of African leader, Democrat, went into power and then became a dictator himself. One thing we must do while we are fighting to replace these dictatorships is to ensure that our organizations, particularly political parties, those that are going to be competing, those that compete for political power, are democratized in themselves, that those institutions, those bodies, those organizations are institutionalized as opposed to being personalized. As long as the state is personalized, or the institution, the political party and so on, would be very difficult to sincerely subscribe to some of these democratic norms that we aspire to. For instance, you look at the Gambia. If Ousainou Darboe decides, hey, I'm tired, I'm resigning, or has some policy disagreements with the other executive members of the UDP, and decides, I'm resigning today, I have to do something else, what do you think would happen to the UDP? Or if Khalifa Sallah has serious disagreements with some members of DOI and decides, hey, I'm resigning from DOI, we have some serious disagreements, what would be the chances of survival for any of these political parties? And I mentioned these two, but you could apply the same thing to all of the political parties that we have now. They tend to, of course, it's slightly different in the case of DOI, but still, they tend to be personalized in a way that with somebody leaving that could spell doom for the political party. So the youngsters and people fighting to bring about democracy, particularly those setting up political parties that are meant to govern, should find ways to democratize their own organizations, to have those term limits and many of those concepts they want to apply at the national level to their own organizations. Unless we see that, we're still going to have difficulty instituting democratic ways in our country.
Thank you. I think you hit a very, very important point here in having people-led political parties instead of an institution. Now, speaking of that, you obviously, ever since you came back from the Gambia, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit here, you have decided to form an organization called CCG, and obviously the goal here, hopefully with your most recent answer, is to turn it into an institution. Can you tell us about CCG, what kind of work they do, what they're about, how it came about?
Well, CCG was founded during the height of the Arab Revolution, particularly March 2011. It was formed in March 2011, and we had online discussions, virtual meetings. Myself and Datafa Sose, Matthew Jallo, and a few other folks, about 10 of us. We engaged in discussions in different parts of the world, but I was the only one based in the Gambia at the time. So from our deliberations, we decided right away to set up a website, changegambia.org, and a Twitter account, Change Gambia, Facebook, and so on. And then we put together an elaborate plan to start sensitizing the population, put out information through our website, provide it to the online media, in order to give people alternative sources of information, because you know about GRTS, everything is Jammeh, etc. And we laid out some of the key things that we were fighting for: freedom for political prisoners, access to the public media for all political parties, freedom of expression, you know the list, abolition of the death penalty, etc. And during our meetings, we were able to put out a couple of important press releases. One was when Jammeh started attacking Gaddafi. We put out a press release. I was based in the Gambia. We put out a press release showing that he was no different from Gaddafi. And when he talked about the elections in Ivory Coast and in support of Gbagbo, that too was an occasion in which CCG put out a press release. But in addition to that, I was able to gather information on some of the president's activities. You know, he spent a lot of time going to Gunjur, particularly the Gunjur beach, the Kenike Jammeh. I would not go there personally, but I had people who were going, and then I would find ways to gather information from them, and we would publish it even before he left town. Some of those infuriated infuriated the regime, and they tried to find out who was behind the CCG, etc. But there was not much to it until we published some T-shirts, 100 T-shirts that are published and distributed. And that started our problems, basically.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you so much. One of our intentions was also to set up a radio station in Kaolack that we would use to provide information to folks in the Gambia, because we knew that internet penetration was very low, and in many cases power outages, etc., limited access to information on the net. So we tried to set up a radio station in Senegal. I was responsible for ordering the equipment, which we did, and it arrived in Senegal. So during that time, we printed a lot of T-shirts, and I took out 100. I got excited on African Liberation Day after participating at a seminar at the University of the Gambia in Brikama, and decided to distribute those T-shirts, and that's how I ended up getting arrested.
Get arrested, okay. And obviously, we will talk about that arrest there, but in your recent response about CCG, you talked about Ndeye Sose. She seems to be that element in the struggle who is very effective but barely heard of. Obviously, she will be somebody that we should talk about more and talk to more, just so that, we can know. Tell us a little bit about this young lady. When you said her name right now, I was like, yes, we always forget about her, but I know she's somewhere there fighting, and she's definitely effective at what she's doing.
Yeah, maybe she's not been online and, like the rest of us, but she's been doing a whole lot behind the scenes, helping Gambians who are fleeing from persecution. She's been doing a lot of help, particularly journalists. People contact her regularly, and she's able to help them. She lives in Mali now. And when I was in prison, I would say she was very instrumental. She ran CCG and was a lead force in putting together CSAG together with Banker and the others. As you know, she's in exile herself because of a press release that the GPU issued when she headed that organization on the assassination of Dede Haidara and the president's statements about it. So she ended up in exile herself. But she has worked, she continues to work with us. Our submissions, it's not just talking and making appointments, but we do make submissions, say at the United Nations, ECOWAS, etc. And she contributes significantly toward putting those documents together. She continues to do so and has input in almost everything we do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is Amadou Coulibaly speaking with Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh. Today is Friday, January 29th at almost 4 o'clock Los Angeles time. Dr. Janneh, thank you so much. Obviously, so far you've given us some very good information. Let's go ahead and take a quick break here, have you get a cup of water, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the current issues. And I promise we're not going to keep you long, but this conversation seems to be going very well, and we would like to know a little bit more about you. So we'll take a quick music break, and we will be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Dr. Janneh, you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the conversation. Amadou Kubali speaking with Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh. Dr. Janneh, so far it's been a great interview, and again, the goal here is to just to move forward in this fight to obviously dislodge a very powerful dictator. I think it is very important for us to really understand how things began, get to understand each other, and have a true conversation, because this is more like archiving what is happening to our nation right now, and hopefully the future will be able to use this information to just know how to move forward. But let's move on to some of these current issues, Dr. Janneh. I know that, like many, you returned home right after you graduated, and you talked about CCG, then got yourself into trouble there, and you ended up in Mile 2, which is obviously one of the worst prisons on the face of this earth. Can you tell us what were the charges that you were charged for just distributing T-shirts in the country?
Well, in very basic terms, sedition and treason. Sedition for calling the regime a dictatorship, treason for calling calling for an end to that regime. So sedition and treason. So I was convicted of both, and then given a 3-year sentence with hard labor for sedition and life for the treason conviction.
So you were in Mile 2. How long were you in there?
Well, the total Mile 2 and Bambadinka combined 15 months. So I was at Bambadinka for 7 months, and then Mile 2, 8 months. I'm sure you've heard of Bambadinka.
Can you tell the average person who doesn't know what Bambadinka is? Can you tell us what is Bambadinka, and what should the average person expect when they say we're taking you to Bambadinka?
Well, there are 2 Bambadinkas. One is at the NIA, and the second one is at Joswang prison. Already we have one of the worst prisons in the world, but even prisoners in the regular prison system, Bambadinka is a whole different story. It is used as a form of punishment. Prisoners who violate some of their rules, or for some reason, they want to punish you, Bambadinka is the place they dump you in. And also, if you are a political figure or someone that is considered an enemy of Jammeh, you may end up at Bambadinka. But it's a very tough place indeed. And as you know, this guy was there at one time, Aliuba, when he was caught, I think they said with a phone. He was taken there. They almost killed him, turned off lights and beat him and did all kinds of stuff to him. The only reason he left was that when I was brought in, they had to take him back to Mile 2, because they want to make sure it's total isolation. It's really solitary confinement, so that there's no other prisoner in there but you. It's a building by itself, very dark, and when it rained, basically it poured inside the room. I got soaked throughout the rainy season in there. Mosquitoes, wall geckos, very, very tough life indeed. They do it, they put folks at Bambadinka to try to break their spirits. And that's why Imam Babali was also taken there. I think he spent 5 months at Bambadinka as well. So it's a very difficult place indeed. So I spent 7 months in there. No access to books, no access to family members, and I ate exclusively the horrible food that the prison provided. Very limited access to my lawyer and also to the U.S. consul. And from there, after I was convicted, Then I was taken to Mile 2, to the confinement wing or the security wing, and I spent 8 months there as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Janneh, at any point when you were in custody, beyond the normal cruelty that they will put you under just to break you down, were you physically tortured there? Or
not physically. What they did was deprive me. There have been cases where they deprived me of food and water for extended periods, and I had to sleep on the concrete floors and not allowed to get out to take showers, things of that nature. And, mosquitoes. If you're left to the mercy of mosquitoes for a whole week and not allowed to go out except even to urinate, they gave me a bottle in there, not allowed to take any showers, etc., for 1 week. And then for the remaining, for the rest of the 7 months, I was given only 10 minutes to just go to another building, take a bath, and then back to my cell. No access to radio, nothing. So it was largely emotional, psychological torture, depriving me of food and sometimes sleep. They would come at odd hours to say they're inspecting the room. I mean, you had 2 metal doors, all firmly locked, armed security all around, but they still had to come so many times over the night to open and, say they're checking on me, and sometimes you had to strip, basically to try to break you down that way. But the U.S. Ambassador, for the 2 or 3 times that she managed to visit me, made it a point to check me properly to see if there are any scars, pointing to provide evidence of physical torture, and I'll tell her, no, if it happens, I will definitely tell you. But I was not beaten or put in, in a hole or something like they've done to many others.
Thank you. I asked that question because there seemed to be some sort of a consistency here when again, the cruelty shows how much this regime hates their own people. When they hold Gambians who obviously are not citizens of any foreign nation, then they torture you or even kill you physically. But when you are an American citizen, then they wouldn't even lay hands on you, and that just shows.
You're very right. You're very right, because even though the ambassador would come and express, dismay at my treatment for just distributing T-shirts and stuff like that, anytime she came in there with the U.S. flag and the diplomatic vehicle, it was a powerful hint that, the U.S. cares for their citizens. And she would tell me in their presence, she told them, Washington is following this case, and we're very concerned. And, then she would ask me, have you been physically tortured? I say, no. She would still check, my body to make sure that I was not saying that out of fear. They were doing all that stuff, but they knew to draw a line simply because I had U.S. citizenship. As you know, Imam Babali was also taken to Bambadinka, but they did a whole lot of stuff to him that I did not experience. Mine was just some form of psychological thing to try to break me down. But the knowledge that I had just before I was arrested, I was organizing CCG, and folks were already on social media. We had contacts in Senegal and Amnesty International. I knew there were people outside fighting for me, whether I had the information or not. And from time to time, I would have folks smuggle, information, basically find ways to get information to me, to let me know Amnesty is doing this, and Bruce Knotts was on, he was the deputy ambassador when I worked at the American embassy, and someone would tell, oh, Bruce Knotts was on BBC, or something was said about your case at VOA, something online. So those are things that boosted my morale, so I was never discouraged, and, that was to their disappointment, I would say.
Thank you so much. So you told us about Bambadinka. Obviously, we now have a better understanding of what they do there and what Bambadinka is. Now let's switch to Mile 2. You were in Mile 2. How long were you there? And I keep hearing stories, and a family member told me this, that at night when the prisoners are sent to these small cells where they're packed like sardines, actually, there was a joke that how they really sleep. Some have to go under the bunkers and stuff. They actually also have a toilet can that people have to use the toilet in there, uncovered raw sewage in the room. And from what I understand, when people have diarrhea overnight, it can get really nasty in there. Can you just tell us about this, just so that the average Gambian can understand what our people are going through?
Okay, Mile 2 is divided into several sections. There is the remand wing, where people who are awaiting trial are kept. And that place is extremely overcrowded. Those are the folks who don't wear any uniforms. They have civilian clothes, etc. And that's where you have the worst form of overcrowding. And that's why you will find people who have been kept for so many years without going to trial. And I would say people who are lost in the system. And you have open containers, that they use to defecate, and there is not a modicum of privacy in there, and disease spreads there more than anywhere else in the prison system. It's very difficult. The only good thing about the remand wing for most of them, well, for some of them, because some are so poor that even if you tell them your families can bring food, medicine, and so on, it doesn't mean a thing. They still don't get any visits. Those are things that you long for when you're in the security wing, confinement wing, because you don't get it. But one thing I envied them for was that they could get the local newspapers. So when they go to court, or their family members would send them the local papers, and at least they knew what was going on from reading that. But that's where you have overcrowding. Well, there's overcrowding everywhere, but it's even more serious in the remand wing. Then you have another section for the women. I don't know how that is, but you have a women's wing there. And then you have another part called the main yard. That's where most of the male convicts are kept, particularly those that have sentences of less than 10 years, or those who are not considered as enemies of Jammeh. That's where they're kept. That too is a place where you have a lot of disease, and people don't have any opportunities in the entire prison for exercise. There's very little medical care. The food is terrible for all of us, not for all of them, not just one section. And then the main area where you have some of the folks that you hear about, the prominent folks, security, former security officials, opposition party journalists, and so on, is called the confinement wing, or the security wing. That's where people have one-man cells. They're very small indeed, and I think you have four buildings in the security wing. The one-man cells, and then in each building you may have four toilets or so. So when you have a break or time off, then you go use the toilet, take a bath, and so on. But in your cell, each one would have a container, and that's where you do all of your stuff with the smell, etc. Once a day, you get out, empty the container, the toilet, and take a bath and go back in there. But you do it in a bucket, and it's very terrible. It's very hot. And I was in building number 5, which is the last building toward Banjul. And if you know that area, if you remember that area, it's very close to where they dump trash in Banjul. So regularly you would have these fires, and then heavy smoke coming into the building. and making it very difficult to even breathe. But that's the case, particularly at building number 5. That's where Tamsir Jasseh was as well. We were both in there, and Gore Secker and a few others were all in building number 5. So it's a very difficult situation at mile 2 indeed. And also visitation is a problem. Those who were convicted and sentenced to death, Jammeh just unilaterally decided they were not going to be entitled to any visitation at all. So the only way some of those folks were able to see their family members is when they're ill and taken to the hospital. That's when they got to see their family members. Otherwise, he said no visitation. And then for the rest of the prison population, it's 30 minutes every 3 months. So we were given 30 minutes every 3 months of visitation. So for the whole year, you had a total of 2 hours to meet with your family, and that is it. And that continues today.
So if you're in mile 2,
yes,
you're saying that you have 30 minutes every 3 months to see your family.
Yes, and that is and those are the lucky ones. Those who are convicted and sentenced to death are denied all visitation rights. All other convicts, except when the president decides they're denying you, sometimes they can pick on you and decide you're not getting anything. But the norm is 30 minutes every 3 months. So for every 3 months, you would have one visitation lasting 30 minutes, and you have up to 3 family members for that session. And then you would wait for another 3 months. So a total of 2 hours for the year.
Wow. Thank you so much.
And even then, you have your family members and a security and a prison officer would sit with you. It's not like a private discussion, sit with you. And there have been cases, especially, Gambia with polygamy and so on, a guy with 3 wives trying to figure how to arrange the meetings. And when the wives came there together for the 30 minutes, no one would be willing to share anything in the presence of the others. And very difficult situation indeed. But 30 minutes every 3 months for convicted prisoners in the Gambia, and 0 for those convicted and sentenced to death.
That is inhumane, and I hope that our Gambian brothers and sisters that would have the opportunity to listen to this will understand that even as a prisoner, you do have a right, and not only are we being oppressed and tortured in our own country, but what the prisoners go through. So you're in mile 2 now. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's when the mile 2, what we know now as the mile 2-9 happened. Walk us through how Dr. Janneh was when you guys heard about the mile 2-9, not knowing if you're going to be part of this, or what was the feeling like? Walk us through that.
I think when I went to mile 2, or even when I went to prison, when I was arrested by these guys, that's when I realized that I guess that's when I lost all sense of fear. I didn't care, and when this announcement was made, that when Jammeh made an announcement that he was going to execute everyone on death row, I took the responsibility with the help of Aliou Ba, who was executed himself, and this guy called Abdusalam Jammeh. He's online. I think he's based in Germany now. He was a member of MFDC, but illegally, arrested and kept there for more than 5 years. And he became our imam. So the 3 of us, with the help of some others, particularly Lamin Dabo, who had been there for a long time, I was able to get the names of all 48 people who were on death row, their names, what they were convicted of, and nationality. And I put everything together a few days after the president's announcement, and I was able to send it to Ndetafa Source, as I mentioned, CCG Secretary General, who is also a journalist, for dissemination. That way, they know it's not just numbers. and in the case of those who are like Senegalese and have a foreign nationality, so that their governments would do something before it's too late. That was our objective at the time. So they were shocked to, see in the news report the exact number of people on death row and so on. But with the lobbying that was going on, we met regularly. Each time we had a short break, even if it's 10 minutes, we would meet to assess what's going on, what we were hearing on the radio. And for some reason, those guys were very fearful and lost hope very early. But we decided to fight as if Jammeh is very serious about this and is likely to carry it out. So we do everything we can within our means from the prison walls. As I mentioned a long time ago, I had an iPhone 4 hidden there, so I was able to use Skype and other online services. It's very sad. Some of the guys had been there so long that even texting was a problem and didn't know much about some of these things. But I was able to send information out that way. And with the diplomacy and ambassadors and ministers going back and forth, we thought he was not going to carry it out that soon, even if he's going to do it, or ultimately he may change his mind. So we were surprised that August 23rd, I think it was on a Thursday night, a large contingent came to the prison at night. We were already in bed, and there was a lot of noise and metal chains, etc. And they went from building to building, extracting a total of 8 prisoners from the men's section and then 1 from the women's wing. And how they selected them is still a mystery, because they would pass 2 cell doors and go to the 3rd one, all of them on death row, and then pick someone and then go to the next one. So it seemed very random. They may have, Jammeh may have given them something to go by, but it seemed very random. And while they were taking them away, Lamin Dabo, who had been there for more than 27 years and one who helped me essentially adjust to a prison life, knew that I had a phone hidden, and so he kept screaming, "Oh, Amadou Ikatamfale, oh, Amadou Ikatamfale," and I was very sad indeed. He's a tough guy, and to hear him scream, and it was very rough indeed. So in the group, other than Lamin Dabo, who had been on death row during Jawara's time and the death sentence commuted to life, you also had some guy, Abubakar Yabo, called Buyaka, who had serious mental problems. The guy was already, crazy before he came to, and then he was taken through a trial, convicted. Only in the Gambia where somebody with severe mental problems could be taken to court, convicted, given a death sentence, and then executed. And he didn't go through any appeal process. And their reasoning is that, well, he had the opportunity to appeal, but he did not. The guy didn't even know he was in prison up to the time he was executed. He had no idea. Everyone knows, at least those who knew him, it's out of the question. He killed his mom, and his siblings continued to visit him at Mile 2 because they knew his mental state, but he was executed. Another guy, Dauda Bojang, did not exhaust his appeals. He was executed. And there was another guy also who was convicted after my treason trial. So he was there for just a few months, no opportunity to appeal. He was executed as well. Malang Sonko, by the way. So it was very sad indeed. But I managed to put a list of all of the names of people who were taken out immediately. And I informed my wife, and I sent it to Ndeta Fasose for publication for the world to know that 9 people had been executed, and we provided all of their details.
Wow. I'm sitting here, and you're talking about how these people were just pulled out like animals and just slaughtered them and just killed without any due process. I can't help but to just. I
mentioned the three people: Aliuba, Lamin Elef Jaju and Lamin Jaju and Elef Jammeh. Those three, I mean, those are some brave guys. Most of us could only imagine being picked up, being told you're going to be executed, and you know the guys are serious, and still be calm and calmly follow them, you know, extend your hands and allow them to cuff you and follow them. I mean, it's those guys are really, really brave, really brave. There was a fight getting some of the others once they realized what was going on, but these guys were true soldiers. I mean, really brave indeed. They didn't put up any fight. They didn't put up any resistance when they came and said, you know, they're going to be executed, and they just took them away.
Well, let's pray that their souls rest in peace, and hopefully in the Third Republic we will have the opportunity to revisit these cases and give them due process and recognize them as the humans that they are. But just to transition quickly there, I know that we talked about the Mile 2 9 right now, and thank you for obviously your bravery to help.
Okay. One more thing about Mile 2 before we go on. Unlike, you know, unlike in other countries, or as opposed to what is called for by the universal standards for the treatment of prisoners, Mile 2 is where, especially in the confined, Mile 2 in general, Gambian prisons, there is no differentiation to say, you know, some of these prisoners have mental problems, let's house them separately. So the crazy guy, the folks with mental problems, the drug dealers, political prisoners, folks with contagious diseases, they're all lumped together. And that's the case in Gambian prisons. So you could be next door to a convicted drug dealer or a political prisoner or somebody who has serious mental problems, and any chance he gets, he may kill you if you're asleep and your cell door is open. That's another huge problem. And Jammeh talks about moving away from our colonial heritage. And he says that when it's convenient, but we know he has maintained the Colonial Prisons Act that is in place, and that's what he enforces to the letter when it comes to dealing with prisoners. Stuff like 30 minutes for every 3 months. These are all contained in the Prisons Act that he inherited from the colonial regime.
Regimes. Well, I mean, the hypocrisy when it comes to Jammeh trying to separate himself from the colonial masters is a simple fact that he still owns homes over here, and this is where he sends his kids and does his grocery shopping, and you know, obviously this shopping for his wife. But we talked about this. I just wanted to, you know, as an American, as a Gambian American citizen, right now we have 2 Gambian Americans missing in there. As one of the leaders in this fight, I'm sure that you do have more information. What can you tell us about these 2? Any updates about them?
Well, we still don't have information about their current whereabouts, but there's all the evidence, you know, evidence we got through the families and others that they were in the country and there's no record of them leaving the country, and the government has a responsibility to tell us what happened to them. And I know from experience, you get picked up by police officers, and when your family goes to the head office or to the police station inquiring about you, their standard response is, we have nothing to do with the person. I went missing for 1 week, and during all of that time, the police told both the U.S. consul and my family that they had nothing to do with me. They don't know where I was. And I would imagine if through what they were doing to me in the makeshift jail at the old airport, if I had died, you know, as a result of their torture, they would simply continue saying, we don't know where he is, maybe just go do something to me. But it's very likely that these guys are still holding these two Americans are not providing information. If that's not the case, then they have a responsibility as a government to conduct serious investigations or to seek help from the U.S. government, since they're dual nationals, for the U.S. government to help in trying to find out what happened to them.
I really hope that they're alive, and that is our hope, and that hopefully, you know.
There's no indication. It's anything different. For all information is they were alive and they're in the country, and they've not left the country. I know for sure that there was some guy from Casamance who was kept at Mile 2 since I think 1997. The family didn't know about him, and each time they came to Mile 2, they were told he was not around. Was only freed, discharged the prisoners who would, provide information about him. So, and the fact that they have makeshift prisons all across the country makes it very possible that they would be holding folks that we've not heard about. But they have a responsibility to conduct serious investigations and to tell us where these two people are. And I think the U.S. government should put more pressure on the Gambian government, not to just send out statements or condemning them, but to put serious pressure for them to finally produce these two people.
Thank you, Dr. Janneh, and for really breaking it down for us again. Let's switch for a minute to Jammeh back again. Like many of us, I'm sure Yahya's recent act of pronouncing the Gambia as an Islamic state did not sit well with you. What was your take with all this, what I call the hijab law? And do you think that he has dropped it totally, or did he just, like he always does, when he does a mistake, he's very good at coming back again and just kind of trying to find a better way to shove it down our throats?
Jammeh is cornered. He is very desperate. And, of course, with a dictator who's fearful of the end of his regime, he would find anything to divide the population, to weaken potential rivals or people he sees as enemies. Jammeh would like for the debate to be about the hijab, about whether Gambia should be an Islamic state or not. That way we forget about the legality of the whole thing. Even if you think the Gambia should be an Islamic state, you would also agree that we have a constitution, as we would say in Mandinka, Sartolebe Bankoka. So we have a constitution, we have stuff that he swore to uphold. So if Jammeh wakes up and changes the character of the country without going through the process that's put in place, he's violating his oath of office, and regardless of whether the policy is good or not, that should not be tolerated. So Jammeh would like for it to be Islam, anti-Islam, or Christian, Muslim, but the fact is that what he did was illegal, it was unconstitutional, and therefore, whether one supports the notion of an Islamic state or not, it is something illegal and should not be tolerated. But he has seen, I think what he did with the head tie thing was to see if he can implement the precepts of the Islamic Republic incrementally, and then see what would happen. He started with the head tie, and with the kind of opposition, the kind of criticisms he got, he had no other choice but to make a U-turn. And I believe if there was no opposition to it, if we didn't mobilize, if the women in the country didn't express opposition to that policy, it would simply be the stepping stone to far broader policies aimed at implementing his vision. And I think, as Jesse Jackson says, leaders should provide vision to their populace, but Jammeh is the one who simply divides. And I think division he would see as a way to maintain his power. But it's going to be very difficult for him to implement. There's an article today published by the Guardian, I believe, which points to the fact that happy hour is still going on in the Gambia, and many tourists don't seem to even realize that the country has been declared an Islamic republic, and we know Jul Brew is still there. You have Banjul breweries and Jammeh himself organizing all of these beauty pageants and obnoxious events. So he's desperate and looking for one way to further divide the population. He tried along ethnic lines. He continues to try that. And religion is another convenient way he thought he could divide the people.
Thank you. Now, I know that this, what I call the hijab law, has a little bit to do with, our social lives too, because once you start messing with the women and their hair and all that stuff, I think you find yourself in a lot of hot water. Tell us, Dr. Janneh, how is it possible for Yahya to single-handedly pull the Gambia out of the Commonwealth and nothing gets done about it? What could or should opposition have done to really stop that? Because we all know now some of the benefits that we get from the Commonwealth are not there, and it is just another way of him isolating us from the international community to further oppress us, because then he's not accountable to some of these organizations that we're members of. Should the opposition have done something? What could have been done?
You can list a host of policies, a host of decisions that Jammeh unilaterally took, and there was no meaningful resistance. The opposition, I thought, should have done a whole lot more. For instance, when Jammeh decided to pull the Gambia out of the Commonwealth, for sure, but even changing the country's name and trying to institute his so-called Islamic Republic, we should not have had just statements. And when he also passed laws changing our electoral process from 2 rounds to winner take all, as the Wolof would say, Raw Gadu, they should not have allowed that to happen. When Jammeh changed the constitution to put an upper limit on candidates for the presidency, they should not have allowed that to happen. And even these new electoral laws he put in place, they should not simply write statements and say we are opposed to them and not do anything. I believe taking the matter to court or appealing to international public opinion is important, but there comes a time when the parties must flex their muscle to show that they have influence, they have a following, and try to resist some of these policies, especially if they're undemocratic, if they're based solely on the whims and caprices of Yahya Jammeh.
Thank you so much. Now, you're talking about what the opposition could have done. Obviously, the likes of CCG, Duga, and all the organizations out there, our powerful media houses have all done an excellent job to stop Yahya from getting some of these key leadership positions like the chairman of the ECOWAS. And now we know that President Sall is obviously the chairman. What does that send to Jammeh and the international community? And tell the people how important these positions are, and when people like Jammeh, who has been in power for 21 years, are ignored, what kind of strong message is sent, just so that people can understand that some of this fight that we're doing, it's very necessary, because if he were to be chairman of the ECOWAS, I think it would have created a lot more problem for us to find him out.
Yeah, assume Jammeh becomes head of the African Union or ECOWAS. It would be very difficult to get the organization to take the political crisis in the Gambia very seriously, because then they would be challenging their own leadership. And I believe that's why, despite the fact that he has been president for almost 22 years, there's been a concerted effort to make sure he does not lead any of the regional organizations. And that is very clear, and I know he's very frustrated about that. Ouattara came very recently, the Ghanaian president, and you see leadership positions being held by those guys, and Jammeh has been totally isolated. It would send a very wrong signal if at this time, with the type of repression, with Jammeh's irresponsibility, to make him head of any regional organization. And as you mentioned, our advocacy, the folks in the diaspora, the Gambian organizations, particularly overseas, we have been very successful in terms of keeping the spotlight on the repressive character of his regime. We played a very important part in depriving him of funds from the European Union, making his international trips far and few between. We are responsible for that. And when he travels, we make sure we give him a hard time. We provide information to the United Nations, to the special rapporteur, and so it's very important. The only missing element is resisting implementation, or at least ensuring that he does not carry out policies that are undemocratic, that are arbitrary. That's where we have fallen short. But I believe with the way things are going now, people and organizations are being emboldened, and we've all seen the need for us to come together, for us to organize ourselves, and to change our approaches. What we've tried all of these years, for almost 22 years, have not been effective in ending Jammeh's dictatorship. I think 2016 is an opportunity for us to find some way to end it. And I think the electoral route is just one of them, but I doubt anyone is placing all of their hopes on just that. There has to be a plan B, keep pressure on him, try to squeeze him more, get him isolated, deprive him of funding, sensitize the population, and push for the political parties to come together. Because for them to engage in mass resistance, for them to try to defy unjust laws, it would be much more effective if they're able to have one voice.
Okay. Thank you so much. We will be talking about the opposition here in a quick second. But given that the ECOWAS leaders understand that we have a crazy nut as a president in the Gambia, and they did not trust him with the ECOWAS chairmanship. Now, right next to us, we have Senegal, the chairman of ECOWAS there. Senegal knows that we have a madman at the helm. Why do you think they're not doing anything or supporting us to help get this, to get Yahya Jammeh out?
It's a very difficult thing, and I don't think I have answers. In fact, I had a program last week where I engaged in that type of discussion with a Senegalese colleague. He asked why Gambians have not risen up to end the dictatorship themselves, that anywhere you go, you look at, you review history, you will see that it's only through the actions of citizens themselves that you end a repressive regime or end dictatorship. But I pointed to the fact that Senegalese intervention is not supposed to be, does not necessarily have to be in support of Gambians. Yahya Jammeh's actions and policies have been detrimental to the Senegalese state, and they have their own fight, which is different from ours, that the president, the Senegalese government needs to be much more assertive, needs to be much more aggressive, particularly in matters where their national interest and their security is threatened. Yahya Jammeh has been a threat to regional security, and beyond the notion of ensuring that we have a democracy, that human rights are protected in the Gambia, I think the Senegalese need to look at this beyond in a broader framework. Yahya Jammeh is responsible for the instability, the continued instability in the Casamance, and if he's not removed, and the longer he stays, the chances of him being taken out through violence would increase substantially, and of course, you would have a spillover effect in Senegal. Therefore, it's their responsibility, especially given the fact that you have large numbers of Senegalese in the Gambia, to do something, whether it's to squeeze him economically, to restrict or even bar Gambia government officials from traveling through Senegal. There are a host of things that the Senegalese could do to make matters very complicated for the Gambian regime. But why they are not doing it, I believe initially they thought Jammeh could be an honest broker in trying to bring about settlement in Casamance. But with his recent actions, his outbursts insulting all of these former the former Senegalese presidents and the current one, they know that we are dealing with a nut, and I hope that leads to a change in their approach as well.
You're very right about that. Now, we talked about how Senegal could obviously help us. Now, obviously, we have to look at ourselves. In your take, Dr. Janneh, what do you think the movement to get Jammeh out needs to do to get the international attention that will trigger change in that country? What does the movement have to do? And when I say movement, I don't like to use the word struggle, although I struggle not to use the word struggle.
I hate using the word struggle. Okay, I understand. Well, as it is right now, we have attracted as much international attention, as you could get. There isn't a single corner of the world where folks don't know about the type of tyrant we have in the Gambia. And you see comedians in the West, in the U.S., UK, as far as Australia, making fun of Jammeh, whether it's in relation to AIDS, witches, etc. They're making fun. And so we've been successful in terms of letting the world know what's going on in the country. As I mentioned, even today, The Guardian published a very lengthy article that covered everything we've been saying about the regime. I think the challenge is what we Gambians need to do now. I believe at this moment we should encourage our folks to get to register to vote. Whether you believe elections would get him out or not, get your voter's card. At the same time, we should all push our party leaders and make sure that they come together and have some kind of a working relationship, make sure that they're on the same frequency. Because whether they're going ahead with elections or engaging in some other form of resistance, either before the elections or after the elections, all of these call for a united front. It does not have to be one political party. There are lots of creative ways in which they can come together to fight to end dictatorship. And then after the regime is dismantled, they can go their separate ways, because you would have very clear rules in terms of how to compete and so on. But it is very urgent right now for us to get our folks to register to vote and also encourage our parties to come together and find a way, because there's very little time. I believe by March there should be registrations and so on. That would give an indication as to who's competing or if they're competing together or not. So the time is very limited. And then as far as the electoral reforms themselves, because I believe without electoral reforms, even if they have a united front, it's going to be almost impossible to defeat Jammeh at the polls. He has already rigged the process. He has tampered with the constitution to ensure that he could not be defeated under the present set of rules. So once they're able to come together, they should fight for reforms as quickly as possible, because under ECOWAS rules, you can't change election laws within 6 months before the elections. So we have a very limited time. And then once they come together, then they will have a strategy. If the guy refuses to go through with the reforms, if he cheats in the elections, they would be fighting the regime as one. But I think that's what we have for now.
Good point. I'm going to engage you in a little bit here about the whole coalition thing. But, just one more question before we take a quick break and then come back and talk about the really hard topic, which is the, opposition. Now, I know that CCG, the media houses, like I said, and the Dugas, have done an excellent job in 2015. 2015 was definitely a victory year for us in the movement to put pressure on Jammeh. He did not travel at all. I think he traveled either once or twice in that year, and already now we've seen him travel a lot more in 2016. I hope that's not a sense of the fact that the movement is relaxing. But without revealing your plan, can you tell us what plans CCG has for 2016 and how can the movement help CCG to put pressure on Yahya and his criminals so that we can finally kick them out?
Well, our plans are very public, so I won't be revealing any secrets. One, okay. From March, I think by late March, we plan to try to convene another meeting in Dakar to try to get the party leaders together and for them to come up with their own solution, a way for them to come together and continue the fight as one front, or at least to be on the same frequency. And if they're willing to come together and fight as one, we are telling them that we will do our best in terms of raising the necessary resources for them to move ahead. And they would see evidence of that because, convening these things are very expensive, but the folks who are helping convening these things, they have a vested interest in peace and human rights and so on in the Gambia. And if these guys come together, they'd be willing to provide as much support as possible. But they know that already. One of our plans is to convene another meeting in Dakar to get all of the party leaders, civil society, and so on, that we can get to meet in Dakar and put pressure on these guys, share information, but put pressure on them to finally come together some way to continue the fight. In addition to that, we know one of their problems is being able to disseminate information to their supporters. The government controls GRTS, and even when Jammeh sneezes, you'd find a headline on GRTS. So we want to at least give them access to radio, FM radio. So one of our objectives is before the campaign really begins, or very soon, to have for them to have access to FM transmission from Senegal. We've made a lot of headway on that. It is something that we've planned since the inception of our CCG, but we've made a lot of progress. But the only thing that would encourage us to move ahead with that immediately is if we have these guys coming together to work as one. Because without that, it's going to be very difficult even making effective use of the media if we are going to have competing messages coming from the opposition. Okay, and in addition to that, we are saying if the opposition pushes for electoral reform and Jammeh resists completely and decides the obnoxious laws are going to remain in place, we will continue advocating for the international community, particularly the European Union and Gambia's neighbors, not to provide any funding because Jammeh is cash-starved and gets his resources from development partners. He can't even organize elections without begging the West. So we'll call on the West and neighboring countries like Nigeria not to provide any resources for a process that's very flawed. That's going to be very flawed. But we still have time to make that determination because the opposition has to fight for electoral reforms first. If he resists, regardless of who decides to participate, we will campaign for the international community not to send monitors, not to recognize the outcome of the elections, and definitely not to provide any funds.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Janneh, and we're very appreciative of the time that you're taking away from your family to talk with us here. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is a conversation, Mamadou Coulibaly, with Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh, and we're just having a simple conversation Our goal, obviously, is not to challenge each other here, but more to give out the information, see how we can work together as a single unit, and hopefully put up a great fight and a good fight that would eventually get Yahya out. Once again, today is Friday, January 29th, 2016. It's almost about 5 o'clock. Dr. Jammeh, we're going to keep you for another 15, 20 minutes. But before that, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we will be right back. And once again, we're very appreciative of your time. And just hang on one quick second, and we'll be right back. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Dr. Janneh, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Thank you so much once again for taking this valuable time away from your family to speak with us here. And we promise we'll let you go in another 15, 20 minutes. Again, I like to keep these discussions really short so that people can have the opportunity to sit and really listen to them and hopefully extract some good information that they can use to obviously empower ourselves to, put up a good fight. Dr. Janneh, let's get to it straight. The hottest topic of the year is the 2016 elections.
Yes.
Do you think elections can get Yahya Jammeh out of office in the Gambia?
Well, if we are talking about possibilities, it's a possibility. But the likelihood under the present conditions, under the present laws, is almost nil. Without electoral reform and with the type of division we see in the opposition at the moment, it's almost guaranteed that Yahya Jammeh would be re-elected. So what we have to do is to ensure that the opposition comes together and then fights to change the undemocratic provisions that Jammeh managed to put in place. In the absence of that, or in the absence of those two things, it's going to be almost impossible for Jammeh to be defeated at the polls.
Thank you so much. Now, in the past elections, obviously, after every election, we've always cried foul play. Many have argued that although the elections were not free and fair, that Gambians are still voting for Yahya in an overwhelming numbers. Would you agree that despite that, overall people are really voting for him? or is it totally just fraud? There's no way he could win elections over there.
Well, because they fail to realize that the electoral process is not just the counting of votes. It's an entire process from when you have people being registered who are not qualified, who are not even Gambian citizens. You have security forces threatening people who do not support the regime and engaging in intimidation and even producing flags and banners for the party, wearing buttons for the APRC. When you have the opposition effectively denied access to public media, we're not talking about private, but public media or public resources, the APRC and the Jammeh use them at will, and the opposition is denied that access. When you have key opposition members being arrested, tortured, put in jail for as little as using Skype and with trumped-up charges, there's no way you can simply look at the counting and say that we had a free and fair elections or that people voted for him. And at the same time, if you look at the number of people who are eligible to vote, if you look at those who have actually registered, the turnout is significantly low, and it's even lower if you look at the pool of people who are eligible to vote, who are eligible to register, and who are qualified to vote. So the turnout has been very low indeed, simply because people do not have faith in the system. They know it's based on fraud and there's a lot of cheating, in addition to the fact that they do not see a strong opposition, that these guys are not together, so they see that the chances of electoral victory are somewhat minimal, and also they do not want to face this threat. They don't want to go through being intimidated and end up losing. So if we're able to turn those things around, it would be we'll have a very good chance. But those are two tough things that we'd have to fight for: getting the opposition together and fighting for electoral reform. In the absence of electoral reform, too, it should not be, okay, there's no electoral reform, let's let Jammeh rule for another 5 years. No, there has to be a plan B. If that means making the country ungovernable, that should be the case. Because Jammeh has to know there's a price to pay if he does not reform the electoral process. Otherwise, and you say, okay, so what? No reforms, they won't participate. I get my folks elected, and then we wait for another 5 years. No. In this case, if the opposition comes together, they insist on reform, he says no. They also threaten to make the country ungovernable if he goes on with fraudulent elections, because if he's not recognized, no one should allow him to carry out any policies in that country. And I think then it would be very effective.
Makes sense. You've made some very good points. Obviously, beyond elections, one of the other efforts that we should look at is just making sure that the country is not governable. And but let me ask you, just very recently you invited key members of the Gambian Society in New York, and you had what looked like a very productive meeting. Can you tell us about this meeting, the attendees, and what you think was obtained at this meeting in New York?
Well, the meeting, the idea of the conference was conceived by CCG, and we expanded it to include a few folks and organizations that we collaborated with before. Putting some of these things together takes a lot of behind-the-scenes work. Drafting proposals, sending them to potential sponsors, and even inviting like the political leaders, working with them and trying to meet their requirements to participate, etc. It takes a lot, but we work very closely together, particularly with I work with Sokhna Sallah and Hadi Sallah of Duga and a few others, some who are affiliated with political parties here. Worked with them to ensure that their party leaders ultimately participate. We sent them letters, we kept them updated, and a few showed up, some didn't come, but even those who didn't come, subscribed to the idea. They were supportive, but that the timing for some reason was not convenient for them. One told us he had to travel and there was not enough time to get a substitute. Another one was supposed to come and then for some reasons could not come. So we had some of that. But we were not, we continued providing information to all of them, including those who could not make it, because we knew even that New York meeting was not just a one-time thing, that there was going to be follow-up. And one way to keep them engaged and to hope for them to participate is to continue to share information. And that we have done. That's why we are hopeful that during the next phase, especially given the fact that it's going to be closer to home, we'll have a greater participation, and all indications are that that will be the case, because we're still working on the proposal element of it. We don't want to be inviting folks before firming up the funding aspect of it. But we're very hopeful indeed, since it's a second phase of something we've already started. But the goal is to work for electoral reforms as urgently as possible, and to get the opposition to find a way, their own way, to work together as one, because we have to have a united front regardless of what we decide to do in our fight against Jammeh.
Thank you so much for that. Now, Dr. Janneh, if you're given the opportunity to be a part of a negotiating team to help bring these opposition's parties together, would you be willing to do that? And are you in touch with these Gambian opposition leaders?
Well, one good thing, not just in terms of being part of a team negotiating, but I have made sure that I maintain a very good professional and personal relationship with all of them. And when I was inviting them, etc., there are people who criticized some of them for not participating, but I made sure I point out that I had engaged them, and many of them, they had some reasons, valid reasons for not being able to come. And I think that's the best way. If you are going to be allies, if you are working on the same thing, not to try to antagonize each other. You can criticize, and in many cases do it privately, share ideas, and that's what I have done with all of them, as you know. And I wouldn't mind helping in that aspect, being part of a team, trying to bring them together, because that's what we have been doing. That's why we try to invite them in New York. So any effort along those lines, if I'm needed, I'd be more than willing to do my bit.
Because I really think that we do have, with the help of the international community, the right personalities, the likes of Sidi Sane, the likes of Malandi, and yourself. I mean, I'm sure a whole lot of other people that I don't know in this movement that can definitely, put their heads together and come up with, a good working, document for these leaders. Let's say now
Go ahead.
Let's say we say, okay, now we have a team. Dr. Janneh is part of a team to speak to this opposition. What is your plan? Give us an idea of what these people should do. What would you do to bring them together? Let's say now you have a team and you're part of that team. What would be your first steps of doing it? And do you think, in truth, is it possible at all for these people to come together?
Well, it's very possible indeed, because the challenges now, the challenges in 2016 are very different from those of 2011 or 2007 before. There's a whole lot at stake now, and I think the party leaders have realized that as well. There's no shortage of ideas in terms of the way forward. It's just a matter of putting them together to put a lot of pressure from the outside for them to see the urgency and basically facilitate. Because I know if we try to create a new ground for them to go through will end up in an endless debate, and the process could take so long. They already have the foundation. We need to bring them together, push them along the lines of their own foundation, and where you have differences, then we can find a way to provide a compromise. Would be what ideas they're providing themselves. Where there's conflict, where you have differences, we try to provide a middle ground, a solution for that. But all that has to, the only way we can have that is to bring them together. And if there's this initiative you're talking about, there is no reason why we could not merge it with what we are doing, or at least link it. Since we know we are likely to have the support to bring them together in Dakar, then we can put the efforts together and see the way forward. This is something for further discussion to see what can be done immediately to bring them together and to do our best to see to it that this opportunity for them to work together is not lost.
Thank you. So, Dr. Janneh, let's assume for a minute we have put together a coalition ready to go, the United Front. What is the first step they should do as a United Front to start this fight? What do you think is the first thing?
The first fight has to be electoral reform, because there's very little time for that. As I mentioned, on the ECOWAS regulations, you can't change electoral laws within 6 months before the elections. So that would be an immediate task to fight for electoral reforms. But to do all of that, they will need resources, they will need organization and organizational structure to help them carry out their work. So once they agree on fighting for electoral reform, they would have to put together a structure to help with fundraising, to help with the advocacy and all of the other stuff. And I'm sure a lot of qualified people, a lot of willing people, dedicated people, youth, women, would readily volunteer if they see that these guys are coming together. Because then if we fight for electoral reforms and Jammeh resists, then it's easier to call people to say, let's do A and B, because Jammeh is unwilling to honor our own constitution. If there's electoral reform and Jammeh ends up stealing the elections, would still be easier to tell the folks, this is we had fraudulent elections, this is what we need to do to change things around. But in the absence of all of that, it's going to be difficult. So the first thing would be to agree on fighting for electoral reforms and to put together common structures to do different things, advocacy, fundraising, sensitization, media sensitization, things of that nature. But all of those could be done. There are lots of people who have ideas put together and would be more than willing to share them if we have a united front of some kind.
Okay. Now, Dr. Janneh, let's assume that what all of us want comes through. We have a united front. We go to the polls. We beat Jammeh. Assume you are one of the people in this Third Republic. What are the three most important things and the three first issues that the new government should address to get us out of where we are and start moving forward as a nation towards development?
One thing I have said, especially right after my release, that I keep reminding folks, and I want to mention here, is I have no interest in serving in the Third Republic, not in any public position, etc., other than the same thing I'm doing now as a watchdog, continue doing what I'm doing to help feed my family, but at the same time serve as a watchdog on matters relating to human rights. But I can still talk about some of the things that the new dispensation would have to be concerned about. There has to be serious reform of the country's constitution to start with, because it's the framework under which everything operates. We have to have things like term limits, and the upper limit for the president has to be removed. Specific laws have to be changed, like the Prison Act has to be changed so that we have a system that is consistent with the universal standards for the treatment of our prisoners. We have to abolish the death penalty. We have to conduct serious investigations into cases of torture, disappearances, and extrajudicial executions. There has to be serious investigation, and the culprits have to be, there has to be justice. There has to be justice. The culprits would have to face the laws. And other than that, we have to ensure that we have a free press in the country, and that citizens have access to information. They have access to information. All of the political parties have to have equal access to public media. We can't allow any new leader to use GRTS as their personal property, and each time the president sneezes, you have a public announcement, you have a headline. Those things have to go. We have to demystify the position of the presidency. There has to be something in the Constitution to ensure that we really have separation of powers. We have a separation of powers. What we have is a one-man rule in the Gambia, where the president can fire members of parliament, the president can fire the village chief, can appoint and fire justices at will. There has to be comprehensive reform of our laws, of our constitution, serious investigations into crimes committed by this present regime. Those are very crucial. And of course, there are policies that the new regime would have to look into beyond correcting the misdeeds of the current regime. Ensure that you have a greater economic integration with neighboring countries, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, etc., so that you have free movement of goods and people, that you have work on the infrastructure like bridge, etc. Those are things that would have to be done to ensure that you have greater integration, better relations with Senegal, and to remove the Gambia from its pariah state. It's going to be a tough job, but those are things, some of the things that the new regime would have to do. But of course, the first thing, free all political prisoners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Janneh, you know what? This is a great conversation. You're somebody who I could sit with for days and just talk, and I think it is very important that we do more of these. We will hopefully have you back again and go in depth. I had a whole bunch of questions for you, but due to time, we're going to go ahead and just skip some of them with the intention of bringing you back here again. I just have a few more questions, and then we will let you go. Thank you again for your time. Dr. Janneh, I have learned some of the things that I've learned, some of the people that I've learned from in this movement is the likes of you and the city scientists. And I keep saying this, and I truly mean this, because I think people like city scientists bring a lot of maturity into our fight. I have learned from the two of you to talk less and be a lot more effective. You don't get caught up in that whole back and forth that we see on social media. With that said, there is an outcry out there that when effective people are so quiet too, they're missing including a whole bunch of people. Would you agree with these people that maybe if you all just opened up a little bit, or is it too risky to do that? Why? CCG is very effective, but it's also not very engaging out there, like, informing people, for people to know who CCG is. You have to be kind of involved to really get to know of your group.
Well, we admit it has to do a bit with how the organization started. When we put it together, we had virtual meetings. Only folks who trusted each other participated in it, because I was the one based in the Gambia, and family, I had family there, my business and all that stuff, and it was a great risk, so we had to limit the number of individuals who participated in putting the organization together or running the organization. And the same thing applied when I was in prison. I was calling these folks simply because I trusted them. If the organization was very open at the time, you could imagine somebody spilling the beans to say, actually he's in prison, but calling us every day. So it's that type of thing. And then later, with all of this stuff, we have our website. We operate a Twitter account, and through the website also we do recruitment. So a lot of the people who contact us to say they're interested in CCG, we put them on a mailing list and we keep them up to date. And when there's an event coming, we seek their input. And many contribute, not just CCG members. You know that firsthand because you've contributed in the past yourself. And anytime we have funding to, say, engage in advocacy, we make sure that at least some of our sister institutions, organizations that have been very effective, that, at least they have some representation. You would see when we're in Brussels, you may see a CCG member and members from other groups when, in fact, the funding may be provided by CCG. When we organized that thing in New York, the funding came through CCG, but there were others involved. So we'll try to improve on it, but there are limitations. We don't want it to be to a point where we'll end up in endless debates and not do much. It has been effective now, but as you pointed out, perhaps if we open up some more, broaden it, that could be much more effective. But I think if we come together and work closely with groups like Duga and some of the others, we intensify our efforts and collaborate more, that would be even more productive.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janneh. Again, we just have a few more questions. Now, you do have a radio station, and you do a little bit of broadcasting work on the side because you record, communications. What did you say, a lobby? Hobby?
Hobby. It's a hobby. That's why I do not have scheduled. That's why there's no scheduled programming, and I can wake up and there's something in the Gambia that's disturbing, and then do a broadcast. Find some human rights reports by the State Department, put them in there. And then there's a lot of music. As you know, I work for Radio Gambia, as I mentioned, and background journalism. So it's more of a hobby, but at the same time using it to put out information when I can, when I have the time.
Thank you. That's exactly what I do here. Today's the day off, and obviously, I've got you, and, I also intend on speaking with Brother Hussein Mbenga also, who is a very effective member of the movement. Now, how can the average Gambian, both in the diaspora and home, listen to this broadcast that you do? Can you give us information?
Well, if you're in the U.S., there's a number, 701-801-3618, to listen to the program. That's 701-801-3618. Or you can simply go to a web browser and type JammanoRadio.com. That's JAMANO radio.com. So if you go to JammanoRadio.com, you'll be able to get it. And if you go to that website, you'll see numbers for listeners in the UK. There isn't a schedule, as I mentioned, because it's I do it when I have time, and when I don't, you generally hear just music, selection of music, or reruns of some programs. But occasionally, once a week or twice or so, we have live programs. And my Senegalese in-laws have a weekly program, and many of the listeners and callers during that time tend to be Senegalese. Mondays from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, called Wassahalat.
Thank you so much for that. And just Dr. Janneh, just one more question, and then I promise we'll let you go. Thank you again for your time. We recently heard, obviously, for the Gambians that don't know Jeffrey Smith, hopefully you can just quickly touch on him, has left the RFK Center. Can you tell us who is Jeffrey Smith? And I know that you've worked with him, and although he has left his current job, is there any plans on keeping him active in the Gambian struggle? And what do you think we should do? Because he has definitely been very, very, very effective in helping us get some traction in the international community.
Well, definitely, Jeffrey Smith is somebody who has told us he will continue to work with us, that his commitment to the fight for human rights, the protection of human rights in Africa, particularly the Gambia, isn't something restricted to his work with RFK. And before we met Jeffrey Smith, much of our advocacy focused largely on the European Union, going to Brussels and then later the United Nations in Geneva. We had much success there, but there's very little done in Washington other than the demonstrations at the at the Gambian embassy, etc. But since Jeffrey Smith invited a group of us in Washington, D.C., several of us, and convened a very important meeting on the Gambia, invited representatives from Human Rights Watch, from Freedom House, etc. There has been a lot of interest from Washington-based NGOs on the situation in the Gambia, and we've seen how Freedom House published, Human Rights Watch published a report recently, and Freedom House has done the same thing. And through Jeffrey Smith, we were able to gain access to the State Department, to key members of the State Department in our advocacy for democracy and human rights in the Gambia. So he has played a very important role. He's online almost 24 hours, posting on Twitter, Facebook, you name it, and providing advice and also seeking information from us, establishing, broadening our networks, nominating folks to go participate in events, giving us ideas in terms of applying for grants. So he has been a very powerful ally, and we were very disappointed that RFK Foundation let him go, but he has told us that in whatever capacity he ends up, wherever he ends up going, he will continue the fight, and we have to continue to call the RFK Foundation, particularly their leadership. Write to them. We have the information on Facebook. Write to them. Call them. Show them how invaluable, tell them how invaluable Jeff Smith has been to our struggle, and your dismay or shock at his termination by the foundation. But we are very hopeful, and we are very glad that he has said he will continue the fight, and we've seen that he has been posting, even after leaving RFK, he has been posting on Twitter and Facebook on the situation in the Gambia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janneh, and once again, thank you for taking your valuable time to speak with us here today, and I hope that the people that will be listening to this recording will really find valuable information here, and also hopefully this will motivate them to continue in the conversation with a clear understanding that we have to keep talking, we have to keep the burning issues on top, the more relevant information, and continue to educate each other. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the conversation Amadou Kubali with Dr. Amadou Scattred Janneh of the CCG. Dr. Janneh, do you have any closing statements, anything you would like to talk about before we end this discussion?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, but what I can say is that we need to continue to fight to end the dictatorship in the Gambia. We need to come together. We should not be discouraged, because it takes a whole lot to dismantle a tyrannical regime. So we should not be surprised that the regime would do everything to try to divide us, to try to undermine our efforts, but we should continue to fight. And victory will soon be in sight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janneh. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is Amadou Kubali having a conversation with Dr. Amadou Scattred of the CCG. Today is Friday, January 29th. It's 5:26 p.m. in Los Angeles. Again, our goal here, like Dr. Janneh stated, he does something of this similar, just as a hobby, and talking to and broadcasting information to help dislodge the dictatorship. That is exactly the intention here. It's not to carry on an extensive debate, but to understand where our people stand on issues, get a little bit of information, and learn how to talk and carry on a civil discussion and a very professional one. Whereas when we find ourselves at that table where we're starting to discuss national issues, it will be a lot more easier conversation. With that said, Dr. Janneh, thank you so much. And obviously the conversation continues. Have a wonderful evening and greetings to your family. Thank you, Dr. Janneh.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and a good night from Los Angeles.